You are listening to Decrypt.
Hey, Paul, how's it going?
Not too bad, Liz. Not too bad. Thanks. How's things?
Yeah, things are good. Things are good. So tell me a little bit about what you do and where you're currently working.
Cool. So I am the CTO with a company called Square1. We are a digital agency headquartered in Dublin. We also have offices in Spain and France and work with about 85 people around the world. So my role is CTO. My background is as a developer. I've been based here in Dublin for most of my life. So that's kind of my background and where I got to where I am today.
Cool. How did you get started in tech?
So I was kind of lucky that as a kid there was computers in the house. From a very young age. I'm old enough now that those computers predated the internet. Back in the black and white days. I was lucky enough as a kid that stuff just it always clicked in with my brain in a particular way. So I'd be messing around, changing the sprite characters in games just to see what way that would work, or building maps in the original Grand Theft Auto when it was the top down view rather than the 3D walk around. So I'm really showing my age there now. But I was lucky enough that there was always something there for me, so I had that kind of interest. So I went to DCU, did a degree in computer applications, and finished that up. And took a bit of a left turn after college. So a few of my friends went off interrailing or jumping into jobs. I ended up being the manager of the busiest cinema in the UK and Ireland for about 2 years, which was a bit of a left turn at the time, but a very interesting life experience. But after about 2 years or so of that, I really needed to use my degree really and get back to computing. So I applied for a job with daft.ie, a large real estate portal here in Ireland. They had an opening for a recent graduate, and being 2 years out of college, I was certainly stretching recent to beyond the point of plausibility there. But thankfully, they didn't look too closely at the dates on my CV, and I snuck in the door there at a relatively early stage in Daft's development. I think I was maybe the 12th or 13th person into the company there, and then over the years that grew up into what ultimately became the Distilled Media Group at the time, with sites like adverts.ie, boards.ie, the journal.ie as part of that group. And as the company grew, there were opportunities for me. I grew from working as a developer into senior developer, tech lead, and sort of stepping up in different managerial positions along the way. And then about 9 years or so ago, I moved into Square1 with a couple of the guys that I'd met, and within Distilled, the co-founders, Kieran Maher and Diego Solorzano, were two guys I got on very well with in Distilled. They'd gone out to start Square1, so I followed them shortly after that. And then we went in Square1, and then Square1 has grown from, I think it was the 5 or 6 of us back then, to the 85 or so people I mentioned there a while ago. So that's it's a very short elevator pitch for me and my background and where we got to today.
Yeah, I love the bit that you were talking about when you worked for the cinema. I'm wondering, I think that I also have kind of a roundabout path to tech, and I love when I talk to other people that have that as well, to learn about what they learned in whatever that role was that they've been able to carry forward with them. And so I would love to hear, is there anything that you learned or experienced while you were working for the cinema that you've carried with you till today?
It's a great question. I think whether it's the cinema. I mean, cinema is ultimately a type of retail job, and retail job puts you in front of all kinds of different customers having all kinds of different problems and different questions and different challenges, and it really helps you develop a very different kind of muscle in terms of the empathy for the customer solution and the customer problem. I think there's often a stereotype you see fairly or otherwise of developers who you go through college as a developer, you only ever work on code. And when you're working in a real company and someone comes to you and says, hey, this user is having a problem with XYZ, and the stereotypical answer is, a developer takes off their headphones and says, well, just tell them not to be stupid, tell them to click a different button or something like that. It's a bit of a cliche, but I think once you're there at 10 o'clock on a Friday night dealing with 5 or 6 people who've paid an inordinate amount of money for popcorn and drinks and had a problem in the cinema, you're dealing with a very different type of a customer. That face-to-face interaction, I think, really helps to put you into the shoes of someone who has a problem and try to see it from a different perspective and ultimately come to a different solution there. And empathy, I think, is in a sort of roundabout way is something you can develop a lot more from those kind of roles than when you're behind a keyboard and a screen and a million miles detached potentially from the people who are going to be using your product and ultimately acting as your customers.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I worked retail for a bit as well, and there is something that's different when you have to kind of respond immediately to something also, right? Like, I think sometimes we sort of have this luxury of like being behind our keyboards and like having time to think about like, how we want to approach something. And even with that time and space, sometimes we don't always approach it in the best way. But there's something about that like real time sort of feedback and response that you have to have. It was also, when you were talking about that, it made me think of like, have you ever seen that cartoon where it's like, it's talking about software development, but it's like they want to make like a tire swing, and it like shows all of these different steps where it's like people are trying to communicate that they want to make a tire swing, and like the product manager has a different idea of what it's supposed to look like, the developer has a different idea, and the end result is this kind of like monstrous Frankenstein looking thing.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah. The communication can break down very easily, I think, in those kind of silos.
Yeah. What was it like for you transitioning from being a developer into being a technology leader?
Quite difficult, to be frank. So, in some ways I was quite well prepared for it because I had effectively been leading a team and leading large parts of an organization when I was in the cinema. So I had some of those muscles were still working a little bit a few years later. But as a developer, my brain is wired in a certain way that when you're fixing a bug or you're building something, you're getting very, very quick feedback. I've deployed a website, I can see it, people are using it, or I fixed the bug's no longer there, great, and you get that that dopamine hit in the brain that says, yes, I've done something useful, I've done something productive here. And to be very frank, I struggled quite a lot moving into a leadership role where, when you're in a leadership role, it's not so much the work that you're doing as the work you're enabling is more important. You're helping the people underneath you solve problems, helping them grow, helping them deal with issues, and helping them improve in what they're doing. And ultimately, your success is an aggregation of their success. And the feedback loop on that can be incredibly long or even not visible. If you're working on my team today, we might have a conversation today about a challenge you're facing, and it might be lucky enough that it unlocks something for you, and 6 months down the line you achieve a phenomenal result with that. I might not even ever know that I've had that impact or helped to do that. So getting the feeling of satisfaction and the feeling of having done something productive is something I certainly struggled a lot with. And I know I've talked to other people who've made a similar transition, and it's not an uncommon feeling when you're coming from that sort of developer background that suddenly you have to find a different way to feel productive, to feel that you've done something. I remember early on when I'd gone into a leadership role, I'd be coming home from a day's work where it would have been all day. I would have been doing one-to-one meetings, maybe performance reviews, maybe helping with planning, maybe helping with all of these sort of things. I wouldn't touch a keyboard for the whole day. You're in and out of meetings, you're talking to people all of the time. And at the end of the day, completely exhausted, batteries completely drained. I'm naturally quite an introverted person, so the energy levels are taxed quite a bit when you're talking to people a lot of the time. But you come home at the end of the day exhausted and feel I don't feel like I've done anything today versus, you know, when you're a developer and, you know, I built this application today and I built this widget and, oh, look at this cool animation I built. And, you know, you've done something there. So getting that sense of satisfaction or that sense of I'm actually doing something useful here. That was a significant challenge for me. I mean, I say it was a significant challenge. It's not necessarily a fully solved problem. You know, I still get this from time to time. You know, I need to have maybe small little toy projects on the side where just occasionally when my energy levels are dropped enough, I know, okay, I can just jump in here, fix this one small thing, get that little dopamine hit, and then, okay, go back to, you know, what my real job is at the moment. So it's certainly a big challenge. And I know it's something that, yeah, a lot of people going through that transition certainly have struggles with, because it's just a fundamentally different way of realizing your own value, of knowing what you're doing, you know, because I'd struggled quite a bit thinking, you know, I don't know what you'd call it, imposter syndrome or whatever, but I'd feel like, am I even the right person to be doing this? Like, what is it I'm actually doing here? What am I doing here? And, yeah, when I speak to other leaders in the organization at the time, I'd be getting, you know, generally positive feedback. They can see I'm doing this right, doing that right, and things are looking all right, but it doesn't necessarily feel like it internally, because I'm used to the little pings in my brain of, okay, you've done this, you've built this, you've done that, you're doing that. And for me personally, in the absence of that feeling, it was definitely very challenging. And certainly in the early days, it was quite difficult to realize that and to, yeah, I suppose adapt my own sense of satisfaction and my own sense of the worth in the work that I was doing.
Yeah, I can definitely see how that would be a huge challenge, because it's also so data oriented, I guess. When you're doing an IC role, you can look and say, you know, I shipped this, I wrote this many lines of code, you know, this and that. Like, there's all these ways that you can really point to, like, what you did, or like you said, like, you know, this is live and now you can check it out. But when it is sort of like mentoring, encouraging, nudging people in the right direction, like making big sort of like structural decisions, or like organizational choices, it's definitely a different type of way to measure. Like, it's hard. And it's funny because in developer relations, you know, that's like what my job falls under. And there's always all of these, like, if you go to any sort of like developer relations type event or conference, there's always all of these talks about, like, how do we measure success? How do we measure what we do? Because so much of the work is relationship building and sort of community, in addition to, you know, some things that are very, you know, measurable in terms of like seeing how many people viewed what you wrote or downloaded the repo that you created or whatever like that. So, yeah, I think measuring success generally is just a really hard thing when you aren't in a role that's very oriented around like a number that you can point to.
Absolutely, yeah. When you're sort of one or two levels removed from the actual metrics that the business will rely on a lot of the time, it can be really challenging to do that. All right, yeah. And like I say, not a solved problem. So if you ever crack it, please let me know. Yeah, I'd be happy to hear.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, you and me both. Maybe we'll both figure it out and we can combine our strategies or something like that.
Yeah.
You know, you mentioned side projects, and I'm curious, are there any side projects that you've worked on that you found particularly interesting?
That's a good question. Yeah, there's a few kind of small things I'd be working on that'd be just kind of scratching an itch in the business a lot of the time. You know, so I would kind of justify to myself I'm spending a bit of time on this thing over here that isn't necessarily core. You know, for example, we deal with a lot of, say, online publishers and news organizations, sport organizations, and so on, where things like the page speed of their websites is very important. And Google provide you a lot of tools for assessing this on an ongoing basis, but a lot of them require you to sort of manually go to a web page somewhere, paste in a URL, check the results, come back, and blah, blah, blah. So one little side project we put together when we were working with a number of users who were trying to aggressively address a number of page speed issues over time. You want to be tracking these things fairly regularly, and having someone manually remember to go in every day and stick this data in a spreadsheet somewhere isn't great fun for anybody. So built a little project where we could go in, we could put in these URLs. It would, in the background, it would go away and fire up all of the different virtual machines it needed to do to simulate real world users visiting these pages, getting the page speed scores and aggregating them and visualizing it. So, non-technical users can ultimately go in and say, okay, here's the impact we're having on the business by this line went up, this line went down, whatever it is. But that was something that could chip away at on the side. I mentioned things that kind of chip away at on the side. A lot of time, what I found is that, again, coming back to my transition from a developer into a leadership role and sort of where I am now and what I might tell myself at the time, initially I found it was very important for me to sort of keep my hand in with the development. And, I'm still here in the trenches with you guys. I'll take these tasks on, you take those tasks on, and so on. And as you've other pressures on your time, you can sort of become the roadblock here on the critical tasks and holding the team back. So with the sort of side projects and the things I kind of keep on the side when I need the occasional dopamine spike or a little bit of feedback, it's stuff that isn't on the critical path. If it's done, it's a nice enhancement, or it's something that's going to help move things along, but I'm not blocking anybody. If I don't get to it this week, it's going to take me another few days. It's not a problem. And this current project was one like that, where there's an unpleasant manual workaround or manual flow that was being followed by this particular user at the time. And if and when this automated system appears, then great, it's an improvement to everyone's life, but it's not blocking the thing from happening. So that was one that got put together that worked reasonably well. It's still running away on the server and giving us the results we're looking for. So that was one that went somewhere. I have my laptop is just a graveyard of new repos kicked off with a to-do list in a readme.
Oh yeah,
I'm going to get around to this and get part of the way there. And it's just absolute graveyard of things in there. Every so often I spin back through the list of them that are there and say, okay, well, someone else has built this since, and someone else has built this since, and just try to tidy up the list a bit that way. But yeah, I keep lying to myself that someday I'll have time to sit down and just start hacking away at all of these sort of speculative side projects, but haven't quite got there yet.
Oh yeah, I feel like anyone listening to this can heavily relate to that practice. The other thing that I love is when you talk to people about the different domains that they've bought, when they've been like, oh yeah, I'm definitely going to build this thing. I'm just going to buy the domain for it now. And then, you like look back, you get like the reminder that it's going to renew and you're like, yep. That was a year ago that I did that.
Reminder of shame. Yeah. Do you remember the great hopes and plans that you had for this domain? No, yeah, that was a year ago, or that was 2 years ago now. Oh, God, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, I convinced myself, okay, if I pay the domain renewal fee, that's a sunk cost now where I have to justify spending all of the time working on it to justify that $5 I've spent on the domain or whatever it is. But yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
That can be a motivator. That can definitely be a motivator. I think that's a really good practice, though, like for folks who might be wanting to go into the managerial path, just having a practice like that where you say like, okay, well, I'm just going to say that I'll contribute something non-critical. I'm just going to have this here for when I really need that, because I think we all kind of go through phases, right? Where like the day-to-day just kind of feels like a slog and you just like need something else. Yeah. So that, I think that's actually a really good tip for folks when they're kind of looking for something and when they're in that type of role.
Cool. Yeah. It's certainly something that worked well for me when I made the flip. My obviously my initial attempt was well-meaning but completely wrong and causing a problem for the team in the end. So yeah, making the flip into I can be a value add if and when I have the time, I think was a key difference there. Yeah.
I'm wondering about when you were talking about how you handle sort of customer requests and things like that. Mm-hmm. I think that something that I've been noticing is a lot of developers and companies can find it challenging to decide, how quickly do we want to integrate this customer request into what we're doing? Yeah. And like, how important is it kind of based against like some of our other things that we have that are really critical to get done. Yeah. So, I'm wondering kind of like how you approach that, how you guys approach it at Square1.
Yeah, it's a big challenge. As you say, you can get all kinds of requests from all kinds of different customers, and ideally, the ideal answer is that you have a very clear strategic roadmap, and everything your customers ask for, you've already thought, and it's on the roadmap somewhere. And okay, you might move the priorities a bit, but it's nice and clean that way. Reality, I don't think I've ever seen it work that well. I think when you're getting customer requests in, a key thing is to understand what it is the customer the goal is, or the pain point is, because very often, depending on the vertical you're working with, maybe you have very technical customers, maybe you don't. The way the feedback is given to you, sometimes you get, say, hyper specific feedback from someone who says, I'm trying to do XYZ, and on this page I want the button to say X instead of Y, and it should really be orange to stand out from this, and it should do Y. And you're getting hyper specific implementation suggestions from the users, and so, sometimes they're valuable, but very often they're sort of masking what it is the frustration is. So the frustration in this case is, okay, it's not obvious to me how I need to do Y. Here's my proposed solution for it. So trying to understand the what from the feedback, rather than the how that may sometimes come through, can be critical to identify, okay, what's the core pain point here? And then you can start to see, okay, are we seeing this with this one particular user? Is this when we isolate what the pain point is this something that's common to a number of our users? And okay, let's either revisit our roadmap or put it on there if it's not on there already. That's a challenge. I think one of the big challenges you can get, particularly in the early stages of a product company as well, is when you have feedback coming through from, say, a very large user or a very large potential customer, which may not be in the general interest of the product as a whole. But we're in a position where, this is a user we really need. So you're at a kind of an inflection point there where you start to say, okay, are we going to go down the road of taking what we're doing and making it hyper specific for this user who we know is going to pay us a certain amount per month and will give us whatever 6 months more runway at least to figure out the rest? Or are we staying true to our vision that, this is a general purpose tool which has a much larger addressable market? We just haven't quite found them yet. Right. In theory, you want to go with the large market, but in practice, when you're looking at the payroll is coming due, you have a large customer who has money ready to go there now. That can be a very difficult conversation to have internally and to manage what way you're going to address that. It can be a big way or a big challenge of handling that sort of feedback, I think. So it's rarely as clean cut as, let's take everything the users say, put them into a queue somewhere, and we'll just start chipping away at them one by one. I remember seeing a talk by DHH, the guy behind Rails, before, and he talked about how Basecamp had handled feedback in the early days, and he said it was more about act on the customer's behalf, if not specifically the request. You're looking at what the goal is or what the general pain point is, rather than specifically, you're not going to get your orange button on this page. Instead, here's a new wizard that should let you achieve generating the report or whatever it is. So I think that's a key point, is understanding the specifics of what you're being asked for there.
That's such a good point. Kind of really trying to get to the heart of what the problem is, because I think sometimes too, especially I think because there are so many developers now, and I've found this myself when I'm using a product, sometimes I'll get very, nitpicky about the UI, to your point, like just all these little things that you're like, well, I would like it better if it did this. But at the end of the day, it's like, is that really a problem? Is it just something that would be nice if I had personally, or is it impacting the functionality? And I think sometimes there is a functional problem. Like there is actually something that's not working very well, but it's like, because that thing's not working well, you see all of the other things that annoy you, and you might be missing being able to clarify what the actual thing is.
Yeah. It's kind of the forest for the trees sort of thing, isn't it? You've got this one core thing that maybe you don't even see it anymore because you've adapted your workflow. You're kind of working around it and managing it in some particular way. But because of that, you're suddenly noticing this filter always behaves in a weird way, or why are these checkboxes here, or these sort of small little niggles, or things that feel like small niggles, but they're symptoms of the broader cause here, that I'm in a state or a part of the application I shouldn't really be in when I'm trying to do this task. And that's the core problem that you want to identify and you want to solve. Yeah, absolutely.
I heard you mention Rails earlier. Was that kind of one of your primary languages that you used or currently use?
Funnily enough, no. No. So PHP is one of the main languages that we use within the company as a whole. We have a lot of different languages in use. We have some Rails, native mobile development, Node.js, a lot of that sort of stuff. But PHP and Laravel is kind of our core. We've been doing this long enough to go through the whole cycle of PHP is dead, PHP is a toy language, PHP is rubbish, all the way back to, well, PHP is actually, it's the ecosystem around it, I think, particularly with, frameworks like Laravel and the way the Composer, the package management system has evolved over the last sort of 6 or 7 years in particular. I think PHP has got a very hard rap when you look at large successful companies that have built huge things on top of it. We've managed to build a whole business almost exclusively on PHP for a long part of that business. So it's the reports of its death are greatly exaggerated, I think.
Yeah, it's so easy to get wrapped up in the I don't know, hot and trendy types of like frameworks and languages. But at the end of the day, it's like, does it work? Are the people that are working on it skilled? And I worked on this project once and I felt really bad because like the most senior person that they brought onto it had never written Python and it was all in Python. Right. And at the time, I was still pretty new to software development. So I don't know, I guess in my head, I'm like, ooh, this like really senior person, like that shouldn't be that, difficult for them to pick up because they're so experienced and they're so smart. But it is really hard. Like it's not easy to understand. Like maybe you can get to like, something that works, but to understand like all of the things that a language can actually do, it takes some time.
Absolutely, yeah, and real sort of hands-on time as well to do it. I think we've been lucky enough over the years. We've worked with a huge number of really talented developers, and I think when you're talking about that case of say the senior developer who is maybe not necessarily experienced in the technology you're using today, but is coming from a very strong background, or maybe is very experienced in a different type of technology, and you're wondering about transferable skills. We've seen it kind of go two ways in the past. You have developers who have just a generally good technical background. Maybe they've spent all of their time working with PHP and now it's going to be Rails, or it was Python and I don't know, we're going to work with Go or something like that. At a high level, they understand algorithms, they understand the core concepts, and translating the language from one to the other, it's a bit of a speed bump. And then the real time that they're taking to spin up is exactly what you described there. It's kind of the idiosyncrasies of each platform to say, okay, well, I know the way that PHP handles request caching, but I need to know exactly what way Rails is going to do that, the language or the quirks or the oddities of that. And they're the kind of bits to pick up. On the other hand, we've also worked with people who are, say, very senior, very capable developers in one particular technology. But what they had done was they had effectively ingested the idiosyncrasies of that technology without necessarily having the same level of understanding. So when you bring them into another technology, their base level drops very, very quickly because they're spending all of their time saying, okay, oh my God, how do I Google for the Rails equivalent of the Laravel request validation, blah, 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 because the core concepts behind it are not hugely clear in their mind. The Laravel specific implementation they could probably do in their sleep, but it's very, very set in that zone. So those people I find have a much harder time transitioning from one to the other at anything close to the level they were before. So that's certainly been a challenge. And we worked with people from sort of both sort of sides there, or both sort of levels of experience at going through that type of transition. So that's been an interesting one to see, I think, because it can be quite hard to identify that gap beforehand, but it's certainly something we've come across a few times.
Yeah, it makes me wonder what things will be like as things like Copilot and ChatGPT keep becoming more ubiquitous and just generally like better and more usable, because I do think it would be cool to see a world in which like it could bridge some of those gaps so people could just context switch more easily.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we've been looking at a lot of those tools ourselves internally, and I think what's interesting about it is that I think at the current level that those tools are at, I'd certainly be more comfortable putting them in front of more senior developers rather than more junior developers, because I found that, you know, to take Laravel for example, I was trying to solve something with a console command recently, and I had it in the back of my head. I vaguely remember, I know there's a way to do this. There's a structure, or there's something that does whatever I need, whatever command argument or whatever I needed. And I couldn't see it in the documentation. I was like, I'm convinced I've written this maybe some years ago. I know I did at some point. So I was in ChatGPT. I was asking it, okay, is there a way of doing this? And it came back and says, yes, there is. Oh, happy days. So it produced all, you know, this incredibly verbose code, exactly stuff. And I went in, and it looked, you know, it looked right. It looked, you know, kind of rang a bell and looked close enough to what I was trying to do. Went in, pasted it in. No, it didn't work at all. It was referencing functions that didn't exist. It was doing all kinds of crazy things, because what it had done was it had taken, say, some of the documentation for, say, some of the testing in Laravel, which syntactically looks kind of similar. And it had just kind of transposed and said, oh, actually, yeah, this thing here is actually this thing. And it was something which, okay, I was able to get to the bottom of it quite quickly, because I could recognize the errors. I kind of knew myself, oh, okay, maybe there's something a little bit off here, and I could identify that quite quickly. But I could see a scenario where a junior developer is given that code and effectively is looking at it and is wasting the guts of a day trying to figure out, you know, is it me? Is there a bug in the framework? You know, all these kind of things that you don't have the experience to say, oh, hang on, I'm going to treat this AI assistant as effectively a junior to mid-level programmer myself, where I'm not going to trust everything they come back with. I'm going to have to validate and check it. So that's where I think at the moment those tools are more useful for more senior people who know, okay, this is maybe 70 to 80% likely to be correct, but I know I'm going to have to dig in here and tweak it or do something with it. So there's a lot of potential for them. I love the idea of, for example, being able to go in and say, you know, here is my user storage class in Laravel. I need to do something very similar in Rails. So what would that look like syntactically? Or you know, something in Python with this particular framework or whatever. Give me that mapping. And then as someone who, you know, coming back to the two types of senior developer we talked about earlier, someone who understands the kind of the core concepts, you can kind of figure out, oh, okay, so that's how Python structures this, or that's how Rails structure this. And again, 70 to 80% chance it's right, 20 to 30% chance it's not. But at least you can be taking the error messages and you're further down the funnel of figuring out what's gone wrong here and how can I figure it out based on your experience and your background. So I think there's still a level where I would be nervous about putting it in front of people who are relatively new in their career, just from the high likelihood that they're likely to spend more time chasing shadows than actually getting the benefits, versus more senior people who will be taking advantage of the boilerplate generation and those kind of time savers, which you know, I've seen in my own experience, they can be quite significant quite quickly. You know, there are kind of small things that, I don't know about you, but there's all kinds of little things. I end up Googling them all of the time because they just won't stick in my brain, whether, you know, it's a particular format. And the links, they're always purple in Google. I always know, okay, yeah, I've been here 87 times before, and it just won't stick in my brain. Those are the type of things now where I'm finding, like the Copilot extensions in VS Code, is I write the comment, and the comment is even shorter than the Google query, and suddenly the code is there and it's about 90% there, maybe a bit of a tweak, but that's saving me bounce out to the browser, do the query, click the link, go in the link, copy the code. You know, it's not a huge time saving. It's maybe a minute or whatever, but it kind of adds up very quickly and keeps me in the flow. So I think from that side, the AI tools are looking very powerful at the moment. But again, with that massive caveat over them that you can't trust everything that comes out of them. They're like a very willing and enthusiastic, but low level assistant at the moment, I think is how I'd look at them.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, because I think that it also, like, if I'm thinking back to what it was like for me when I was learning how to code, I remember I would like look up tutorials of things and be like, I'm so lost. I'm already so lost, you know? And I think that if you had something telling you, like, this is how you know, send something to S3 with the AWS SDK, and it gave me the wrong thing, like, to your point, it would have just been like taking up so much time trying to sort out, like, is this thing actually, how is this how you do this? Like looking at the documentation, looking at, and it would just be like taking up more time than it would have to just like sort of learn it from the beginning. So I agree. I think there's like certain cases where it's very useful, where you sort of, if you're more senior, you kind of know what to expect. So when you see something and you're like, oh yeah, that's calling a method that I haven't imported from anywhere. Like, obviously that's wrong. You can sort of like smell that and like catch it sooner. Yeah. And the other thing that I find interesting that I've been paying more attention to is sort of the security implications of what these tools might have, and sort of like in the vein of what we're talking about, if we just start sort of cobbling together different things that we've generated using large language models, even if it works, there could be security issues if you're really not like thinking about how you're building something from that perspective. So wondering, how you all think about security at Square1 and what your approach is there.
Yeah, I mean, security is a huge challenge, and it's a critical one. We deal with all kinds of different platforms, all kinds of different clients storing different types of information, whether it's personal, financial, whatever, all kinds of critical information. And figuring out how to store it and how to store it securely and safely is a big challenge, because you have application design challenges. You're going to have infrastructure management. You then have monitoring. You're going to have your own policies internally for how people should and shouldn't behave. There's checking in on that. There's a whole world of things that need to be taken into account around security, because just the potential of any breach is just nightmare fuel if and when something goes wrong. And that's purely from even a reputation or a business perspective, before you even start to look at the regulatory impact under the GDPR or whatever of potentially leaking sensitive information. So in an ideal world, you can't leak data if you don't have it. So ideally you don't want to store anything, but practically that's not the case. So very often for us, we run into challenges when we're talking to, say, a user who wants to build an application, and you're collecting a lot of information from people. And so we're talking about, okay, how we're going to store it, how we're going to manage it internally. The way that you may do encryption can impact on your functionality, for example. If you want to do a partial email search, it gets very computationally expensive if you are encrypting your data internally, versus you store that all in plain text. Yeah, people can search it and do what they like, but you're potentially increasing your risk surface there quite a bit. And a lot of the time, we get users who say, okay, well, we want to get this data and this data and this data and that data, and say, okay, well, what do you need all of that data for? Well, just in case, maybe we need to target them by gender down the line or something like that. And the just in case are the words that just send a shiver down my back when we're talking about applications. Thankfully that has dropped a little bit over the couple of years since the GDPR came in, but it's still relatively common that we want to gather as much as we can, and then we'll figure out what to do with it later, where it's challenging. I mentioned I worked on a classified site years ago, and we at the time were dealing with payment handling. And the payment handling was, this was before the likes of Stripe or any of that came along. So, it was all direct implementations, and the credit card information would come into our servers and then would be passed on and so on and so on, which meant that we needed to get a PCI certification. And going through all of the paperwork involved with that, all of the processes, all of the overhead, monitoring, the recertification, huge time sink, huge drain on everyone involved, which means you can't be doing other things that are adding value to the business while you're effectively ticking these boxes. Boxes that need to be ticked. They're important boxes to be ticked because they're protecting secure information. But at the same time, you've a roadmap the length of your arm that needs to get built for new features, and you're spending your time on this internally. So when the likes of Stripe came along and said, "Hey, that credit card information, let us worry about that. It's not ever going to touch your servers." Godsend. You can't lose information, or you can't leak information that you don't have. And what Stripe have done with credit card information, whatever Vault are doing with pretty much everything else, take that information, just don't let it go into our systems, and let us access it, sure, but the security and the safety sitting with people who are this is their job, this is their main job, they're going to be better at this than they ever will be. It takes a huge load off when we're designing applications and building applications to say, okay, here are these trusted partners who know what they're doing. They know this stuff inside out. They've forgotten more about cryptography than we'll ever learn. They know all of this stuff, and we can implement it in a very developer-friendly way quite quickly and quite easily. It's a godsend in terms of our application design, because the potential for leaks and the potential for data getting out is yeah, it's scary stuff, and the number of operational processes and stuff you need to have around that. Even with these providers like Evervault or Stripe, you still need to have, you know, this best practice internally. But it's a huge load off to be able to say, okay, well, the really really critical stuff, we know where that is, we know how it's controlled, and we know what the risk pattern is around that. So it's a huge thing for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there are so many different aspects of security that developers, security teams, tech companies have to worry about. The more that I'm spending time in the space, the more that I'm realizing just like the number of ways that an attack can happen, and the number of ways that like we just underestimate. Like, you know, people are very creative and in a very scary way. So yeah, it's hard to manage, right? It's hard to balance these things, but I do think it's very interesting, the number of sort of companies that are starting to take off that sort of focus on like protecting one single area. I mean, I think Stripe is such a good example of like choosing one thing to focus on and, you know, A, be really good at it, and then B, do it very securely. You know, like it's such a trusted name and such a trusted brand. But yeah, hopefully we figure more of these things out as time goes on. But yeah, Paul, this was such a great conversation. It was really lovely hearing just about your experience, you know, becoming a leader, going from being a IC developer to being a tech leader now, and the things you learned along the way, and all of the PHP bits as well. So is there anything else that you'd like to share before we go?
No, I think that's covered a lot of it. No, just thanks for the time today, and thanks for the opportunity to come on and have a chat. It's been great talking to you. So yeah.
Decrypt.